Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Joe. I'm really excited to be here, as I am every time, especially to learn all about some of the awesome work you're doing down in Georgia. And so before we get started, I always love our guests to just kind of give an opportunity to reflect on who are you, what is your current role, and like the structure for which you're working within. And then we'll jump into our conversation.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate the invitation. My name's Joe Sowell. I work for Georgia Transmission Corporation in Tucker, Georgia. We're just outside the suburbs of Atlanta. We're a transmission provider to 38 distribution co-ops in the state of Georgia. And so when I say transmission provider, basically we build the wires and the poles and the substations that get the power from the generator down to your local distribution co-op. At the substation, they take it over and send it out to your house, and they're your actual retail provider. So we basically provide that transmission service to get that energy from the generator to your house, to the co-ops.
Lovely. And I will say, I think GTC and really the whole corporations that are interconnected. So a lot of things that we talk about on the Grid Mod Pod is really, there is a transformation happening across the electric utility industry based on new technology that's become available through great innovative works over many decades, as well as a refocusing on the infrastructure that was. So the infrastructure that we've built over the last 100 to 80 years is coming to a point of reflection where it's aged, and really how do we serve? And honestly, when I started this wasn't a talking point, but the enormous amount of increased load, aka customer requests for new energy usage. 3 or 4 years ago, we were all looking at kind of a plateaued, some parts of the world were growing the grids, but a lot of the grids were kind of stagnant because really the energy efficiency space was well in effect.
That's right.
When you say GTC, you guys are the transmission. So there's also the bulk generation that's overseen by a core group of folk. And then you, as you serve the individual distribution companies, they're the ones that facilitate the asset of the distribution space, which for our listeners, is anything less than 69 kV, 69,000 volts. And then you get into the individual customers, but for muni and co-ops, you guys use the language members because they're all kind of a part of the overall performance of those assets. So you guys are the transmission folk. And here on the Grid Mod Pod, really the purpose and the objective is really to share all of the great, innovative, forward-focusing work that's happening within the electric utility space. As we know, and you and I know, electricity is the lifeline of society. So it's such an amazing space for us to be in. And I think in a position of honor to be able to share stories like the ones we're going to talk about today. And I like to and there's been 2 or 3 of these conversations, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of the success and really kind of the work that you're doing around the awards from the GRIP funding. And that is the Grid Resiliency and Innovation Partnerships. And the Department of Energy, the Deployment Office, is running a program to help support really a lot of the grid modernization efforts that's required for aged infrastructure while we embrace all of the new technologies available. And you guys, which I won't steal your thunder, has successfully won some really cool awards to really drive some of the visions that the ultimate reason for this funding became available. So with that, why don't we give our listeners a little bit about, what are you guys doing down there and how'd you kind of build up that project? And we'll talk through, those dynamics.
Sure. So, as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act came out these concepts that DOE was requesting to increase resiliency throughout the country. And so it all started about 2 years ago, almost a little later than here. So it was over the Christmas holidays. And I was tasked with coming up with a story that would apply for one of the DOE GRIP grants, at least from a concept letter standpoint. So over the holidays, I started running some of our databases. We have a radial load database, which is basically a substation served by a single transmission line. So it's only got one source of transmission voltage to it. So if you lose that transmission line, that substation's out of power. unless there's some other generation in the area, but on the distribution system. But in most cases, in rural Georgia, there's not. So we started off with just a list of all of our radio substations. And from there, we've had our fair share of hurricanes and tropical storms over the last few years. And so those storms have contributed to several of these radio loads that go out quite frequently during a storm situation. So we took that mapping and we looked at some of the performance of these radio substations and basically picked out the top 10 or 15 and said, can we do something to fix this poor performance from the radio line going out? It also happens that the state of Georgia has a Justice 40 federal map overlays that shows us where these disadvantaged community locations are. And lo and behold, most of these radio substations were actually located in a disadvantaged community according to the federal map. So when I gathered all of these poor performing radio substations, we started looking at, well, how can we serve them better? Can we build another transmission line to it? And that was our preferred method to start with. We know that's a proven technology. It works. We do want to use some type of high temperature conductor or advanced conductor because this is DOE. It's a research project. We need more familiarity with these different types of conductors as well. So when we looked at the substations, we looked at anything greater than 10 miles and anything larger than 40 NVA miles. So basically you would take the length of the radial in miles and multiply it by the amount of load that the substation serves. And you get a MVA mile number. So anything greater than 40 MVA miles was my threshold. So we looked at all these substations. We looked at the neighboring transmission lines that were close by that we could actually run a second source to. And for the ones that made sense, that was feasible, we basically built a project and put those into the grant. Well, not all of them were feasible. I mean, we have some pretty long radials that serve some very rural communities in Georgia. So for 6 projects, we found that the load was small enough, but the line was too long that we could actually use a microgrid with battery systems to support it as the backup to a transmission source. So for 6 of our projects, we actually are proposing to put in microgrids. For the other substations where we're going to build lines, we're going to build about 80 miles of transmission line. But as part of the grant, we wanted to improve the overall system because we've got a fair amount of solar in the southwest portion of the state. And solar comes with its own challenges. Specifically, it's non-dispatchable. So as cloud cover comes, you can't really firm that up. But batteries have been a proven technology to help firm up a solar dispatch. So we actually found 3 other locations to where we could put larger size batteries that will help our system. You don't have to be located right next to the solar. They can just be on the system that can provide support for these solar installations.
Right.
So to us, the benefits looked really good that we could fix and solve reliability problems. We could build new transmission lines that will, in areas where there's already solar development, so that will give them new connection points by building new transmission lines. And then we can add batteries to help firm up that solar and make it actually dispatchable so that our operators could use it as well.
So I'm geeking out over here because, I've been in the rooms of the utilities, trying to determine and prioritize projects and programs based on what we know, which is mostly where all humans sit, in the comfort of what we know. And then, being driven or asked to think outside the box is typically not a space the utilities sit in all the time, as we're very risk adverse because we are the lifeline of society. So doing what we know and how we do it is really poles, lines, transformers, wired solutions. So what I heard was this project, this story was a mixed bag of really all facets. You have your core infrastructure that we all know and love, and we know we need increased infrastructure transmission to meet some of these large energy demands. You're embracing and checking out the conductor, which is an advanced technology that has been proven, but not by a lot and not by, it's not rapidly gaining, but the the thing in the utility space is not everyone wants to be the first. So, giving it some roots. So that's awesome. Then you have the microgrid perspective. You have the engaging more on-site generation with your solar, and how do you create that solution for the gap in the intermittency. So really, you kind of check all those boxes. And I guess for our listeners, I think a lot of people don't understand the complexities and the challenges that the utility folk have when prioritizing their limited people resources as well as financial resources. And so when we think about the GRIP program, I mean, I think, I said 10.5 billion, which, as you said, is secured by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Something else I love to speak about is like the New Deal era, where we invested in electrifying America. We actually had, it was called the Rural Electrification Administration, that ran between 1930 and the 40s. And it was approximately, in our dollars, $8 billion, which is very comparable. And so when we think about what we did with that funds, like we ultimately built out this massive amount of infrastructure to meet all of those rural customers and give them, a lifeline to the ultimate society we built. And if you think about when you had to plan that, it was really kind of with a blank slate. So now here we are 80 years later, and it's such complexity because you have the aged infrastructure, you have the new technology, you have the new way of thinking, and possibly there could be a technology that really opens a floodgate of new novel ideas that we don't even know based on how fast technology is advancing. So it's such an exciting time. So I love to hear that you guys were able to create a story based on really all of the foundational work streams that are really moving through each of the utilities boardrooms.
Yeah, Elizabeth, it really takes, I started off saying that I was sitting there over Christmas holidays. I started this story, but we've got a lot of folks here that are doing other parts of their, positions in the company. Some are after renewable interconnections. Some are in the O&M space. Some are in emerging technologies and trends. Once we started what the goal was, and the goal was, let's fix poor performing radio substations.
North Star, you created
right? The North Star. Wow, that's such a buzzword now.
Yeah.
But once they had the North Star, they said, oh, well, if we do that, then we can expand it to do this, or we can tell the story to say, this is what else this is going to provide, like additional solar interconnections by being able, just building additional infrastructure. That's a lot of times the detriment of solar integrators is they buy some property, but there's not a transmission line anywhere near it. So they got to build to it, which can just destroy a project financially. So by us going ahead and building more infrastructure and solving a radio load problem, we can now route that line through areas where we know there's attractive interest in solar, and just basically get two birds with one stone, right?
Right. And I guess another clarification, like when utilities, they're not, it's all a little bit different, but you have to have your clear criteria to prioritize what's before this funding is even available, right? And then you're literally determining and really scoping and ranking, which is very complex when you have many business units, as you just mentioned, kind of actively keeping the system running. But then also, they all develop their own needs. And then you're managing the resources, you're planning the scenarios of like each individual idea takes various time frames. So like it gets very complex very quickly.
That's
and so
right.
I think the brilliancy of the GRIP, which I don't think people understand, is, giving you, this awareness that it's your problems or the complexity is seen, and we're here to like support that drive. And like what you said, you're able to bring multiple perspectives together to create, many ideas to really move maybe a project that always had value, but when stacked and really the challenges of the people and the resources, it just always kind of maybe hedged a little bit to the left or the right. Like, for instance, embracing a whole new technology to understand how to standardize it, how to operate it, how to install it, like your, advanced conductors.
Well, I'll tell you, Elizabeth, I've been with GTC 22 years, and we've always tried to come up with a solution for radio load exposure, right? And it's a risk. Everybody knows it. It's a moving risk. It's not always the same every year because outages are different. So we didn't really have a plan to fix radio loads, but this DOE GRIP grant, opportunity is something that we were able to do as a wish list, right? These were not projects on our radar at all. until the DOE GRIP grant came out. And we were able to, you made a comment that engineers can't be creative. And I agree, it's a struggle. But in this situation,
Pressure to be creative.
Yeah, we are pressured, right? So this gave us an opportunity to say, all right, how might we fix some of these things? We can't fix them all, but how might we come up with a little bit of a ranking system? And how might we take some of the newer technologies like microgrids? And I'll tell you, my staff now is still sweating over the implementation of these microgrids because we haven't figured it all out. They're nervous.
Right.
Because we haven't figured it all out.
Right.
Because we're going to operate them in an island situation. And there's a whole lot of complexities.
That's an achievement.
That's right. It's a whole lot of complexities. But it really helps to have some young engineers that are excited about new technology, that aren't scared, that really want to learn it. And we've got a few of those championing this effort. And it's great to see them just turn loose and say, man, go figure it out and come back. Tell me what you need. How can I support you? And let's go out and make a difference. So it's been a great time.
So, like, I also heard in that is, there's a lot of successful or just, opportunity to create strategic internal stakeholder alignment. And also, this is really motivating in your projects that in the story you develop. You need to build some external partnerships too. So kind of what approach have you used in regards to selecting the various new partnerships, because as you know, like, you don't have the specific devices yet. And so now you have to go out into the industry and procure and analyze. How's that process been?
It's been a struggle. So we do have an existing project where we are putting in a microgrid in the central part of Georgia. And it's basically fixing a distribution reliability problem. And this project's not part of the actual GRIP grant itself. It was something that we had already negotiated with one of our distribution co-ops where they were wanting us to build a line and a sub. But again, they had a fairly low amount of load and the line was going to be about 5 miles in length. So it was going to be an expensive solution to fix something for 3 MVA of load. So we asked them, can we consider using a non-wires alternative like a microgrid? And they were very supportive and open-minded and said, absolutely, let's try it. So we've used that project as a pilot, and we've taken steps to learn our way through designing and implementing. And we've made some mistakes along the way where you hire the wrong consultant, or you don't expand your contractor competency list and stuff like that. But now that we've got a better handle on those things, it's going to help the DOE GRIP grants go a lot more smooth. We have reached out to some of our R&D cohorts like EPRI, and we're doing some activities with them to help basically do some of the system planning studies that you need when you go into a microgrid analysis. They're going to help us walk through, and they're going to actually use this existing project as a pilot and help us define those so that it'll basically serve as a template for these next 6 that we've got to build. So it's not been real smooth, but we're getting there. And as we start solving problems, it gains a little more momentum. Folks now believe, hey, we can fix this.
We can do hard
this.
things.
So I don't have to be scared about this. So we can do it. So that's been a very, very good experience.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's not something we all talk about enough is, the process and the journey of all the learnings that you just kind of explored. And it is challenging. It's not maybe the smooth sailing that, we expect, but how can you expect something when you haven't experienced it? But that is the reality. And so the benefit that may not be, penciled out and cost benefit analysis can be done on it, but you're learning what all of these various aspects are as you move through it. And I think, that language or how we embrace the community, not only our internal folk, but the communities that we serve, that it's not, we're just people too, championing and effectively building out really new ideas. So, just the grace of it all, it is an experience in itself. So I love to hear.
Elizabeth, one of the things I would advise to other utilities that may be considering putting in batteries or microgrids. There you go. I love that. You just mentioned about penciling out in a business case, right? And we took a very simple approach to evaluating these projects economically. And we basically just looked at capital cost. And we said, you know what? what's the cost of building a wired solution? And what's the cost of building a non-wire solution? And if the non-wire solution is cheaper, then let's try it. And because there's other funding support that you can get through the investment tax credit or the DOE GRIP grant. So you've got a cheaper solution and you can get government supported subsidies. And just doing it in that simple manner is a way for you to just move forward with the project. I feel like too many people try to analyze the business case into too deep of a level that they never have a pencil out.
Tell me about
it. I know. So, and it is, I mean, you're going to spend a ton of money whether you're going to build a wired solution or not. And you might as well start taking on some of these technologies because you're going to need to know about them. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but you got to at least try it and not just dive through all the numbers and say, well, this one's $5 too much more money, so we're not going to do this one. You're just missing the boat.
Right. And I think that also has to be another aspect of, to make this work and any work happen, it requires people and, training them and then really providing that opportunity to learn as you all move through. So I think, from an engineering school perspective, or even like any school and schooling or education, or really any technical trade program, I think we get stuck in what to learn. But the bigger learnings is how to make all of the parts work together. You guys painted a fairly, to me, maybe not to our listeners, extractable storyline where you really can move the ball along while hitting multiple systems. And from that effort in itself, you're going to learn about all of the various integration points. So that's
absolutely powerful. And executive support is another item that, you really have to have that kind of support. You mentioned earlier that by nature, utilities are conservative, don't take a lot of risk, that type of stuff. And fortunately, our CEO, Barbara Hampton, has just been a proponent of new technology, loves it, can consume a mass amount of media and says, these things are saying that they can solve these problems that we say we have. Let's try them out. Let's see if they really fix our problems. And so she's been very supportive about us trying these pilot projects. And our board of directors have been very supportive in saying, sure, let's try these as a pilot. You guys come back, tell us if it worked or not. And if they work, we've got another tool in our toolbox. If they don't work, we'll wait for the next technology to come out.
Right. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword because fundamentally, if your pilot is successful, that really gives a lot of other utility folks, because remember, we don't like to be first in anything.
That's right.
If it's not, we also have to remember there's no peanut butter spread solution. Every grid is very unique and different. So it ends up being a challenge that, each individual machine, which everyone kind of oversees a part of the bigger parts, especially in the transmission space.
That's right.
May react a little bit different to some of these technologies. So just making sure that awareness is there too. But I feel like we, if I wanted to rattle off some of the benefits, what I heard just to kind of, and we didn't get into the details, but I think we could definitely spend an hour or two, you and I, really talking about, the significant challenges of each one of those projects.
Yes.
And really the talent that would be required to be overseeing it and, the technical difficulties. And I also think a lot of people forget that in itself is a hurdle. So again, I don't know why I'm asking people to give us grace. It feels like these are very large asks. And I think the value of these conversations is to share that there are motivated and, as you said, inspired, new engineers in it to figure it out and move it forward. So it's just awesome to hear. My next question, which you kind of shared a little bit, but bigger picture, you have the GRIP projects. What I heard, just to kind of reiterate, is we built the grid out to meet our rural customers and members that have the energy. But in doing so, because of the expansive land space, it's not always economically feasible or rational to build 2 or 3 sources out to these distribution grids. So you said there was one transmission source, that in itself is a big deal. And there are lots of parts of our grid that have that. And to make it more robust, it does come down to this non-wire solution. which 12, maybe 15 years ago, I don't know why I said 12, it might not have penciled out, like you said, even with all of the, I mean, it was like 10 times. And so just over time and scaling and advancement and parts, as you said, it's actually becoming a scalable project. So I think that's clutch that we highlight that.
I think you're right, Elizabeth. I mean, you said 10, 15 years ago, I mean, batteries at scale were just really not available. And they certainly weren't available at a very cost competitive situation. And having government subsidies really helped us and convinced us to move forward. And it's been on our radar for a while. We knew at some point that this technology would be close to a penciling out on the business side. We just needed a little bit of nudge. And we've participated in a lot of forums and workshops, especially with other cooperatives. And there's a few other cooperatives that have actually put in some microgrid technology. North Carolina EMC is one of those. And I've challenged my folks yeah, there you go. I've challenged my folks to, when they come to me and say, we just can't figure this out, it's been done. Call somebody,
Right.
Especially from a cooperative standpoint, one of our 7 principles is to learn from each other. And North Carolina EMC has been a great partner in helping, being basically an open book and saying, well, this is how we did it. And it may not be perfect for your system, but it works for our system. So they've been really great.
Awesome. And I think another, just to add, or, like batteries in themselves, like when we say batteries, I think everyone thinks it's like specific to one element, but there's the chemical portion of it. This is really not highly technical, but really a battery energy storage system is many parts and components. And really it's the inverter that is the challenge to integrate to the grid. And so like in my mind, as these types of solutions are developed, we can't lose sight of all of the components that are beginning to be understood and ultimately can be advanced and really could be swap in, swap out, as long as you have your relay and protection, your controls, you have your wires built to like transmit, like all of that can be reused or reassessed. And I think we think that it's like well, these can't be, they only have a life of this long, or like if there might be a new technology tomorrow, but all of the other steps to get it to be integrated is also a huge value. So,
and that's a great point, Elizabeth. So what we've learned through the first pilot microgrid that we're actually going through and actually constructing now, we separated our bids out into basically the engineer, procure, construct, the builder, and then we have a separate section called the integrator. And that was something we had to learn through we actually had a smaller pilot where we were building a microgrid at our equipment warehouse, very small scale. But through that effort, we learned that, hey, you can hire anybody to really buy the batteries, buy switches, grade out the property, put a fence around it, build some lattice steel or whatever. But there's just a few folks that can really do integration well. And it's taking those batteries, finding the right inverter technology, and then integrating it into the actual grid. That's the hard part. And that's the part where we had to separate those out so that we could get a better cost and a better work product from the integration side. And right or wrong, that's how we're doing it. We're going to learn from it, but we feel like it's the right approach.
Right. And you wouldn't have been able to identify the gap unless you actually moved forward with the project.
Oh, exactly.
And what you do find is a lot of the learnings come to this moment of truth when you're taking new asset that you don't actually understand how it behaves and allowing it to talk to an asset, aka the massive grid, and then how to coordinate the two in a way that's, not detrimental to those that you serve, while also not detrimental to the asset you just invested a large amount of money in.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think that's all, really important. We actually did host a battery energy storage integration workshop. And that was actually the key finding, was that is where the magic happens. And again, it's not lost on the resources that you've developed. I mean, they all become a little bit more aware, the knowledge is built, and then you kind of growing that workforce in a very, technical space is incredibly valuable. So as I said, we probably talk a lot. I do want to wrap, thinking about those new engineers or really new folks that want to come in and help construct and really energize and integrate the systems. From your position and really your experience, as you said, you've been at GTC for quite a bit. What's your, words of wisdom or any nuggets of wisdom that you've learned that really you've championed through and you've kind of made your job, I'm assuming you enjoy it. Otherwise you would not be sitting
I
here.
wouldn't be here. Yeah.
Yeah. So share that with, some of the listeners that are
Okay. So
steps.
Probably, 10, 12 years ago, see, I used your number 12, but about that time, I started participating in R&D forums. So EPRI was one of those. NRECA had the Cooperative Research Network. So I started, for lack of a person to go, I raised my hand and started going and got engaged and started learning how the actual research programs work. And they're all specific and unique. But the one thing I found out is it takes people to go to these efforts to learn from them. And every time I went to a manager or some other group and say, I need someone to go to a transmission substation or transmission line forum or meeting from an R&D standpoint. And they always go to their senior level engineer, who's going to be the older, wiser, more experienced engineer in the group. But 9 times out of 10, that person doesn't want to travel, doesn't want to think about anything new. Hey, I've got standards. They work. They're beautiful. I wrote them, so don't mess with my standards.
Right.
And so you get a lot of lack of engagement, and you just get a lot of bogged down. And so we finally stopped looking at the SME, and we started looking for, I wouldn't say high performers, but just young engineers that were kind of standing out, doing a little bit above you might, not really going way out of the way, but just showed an interest that would start a conversation with you when you walk down the hall, right?
Right.
Just looking for those kind of individuals. And we started an emerging trends team. And basically the membership of that team is a group of officers get together and we talk about who do we think would be good participants in this team that's going to embrace and engage in the technology. And we don't think about that SME anymore. And that's been game changing for us because now we got people that they don't know everything, but boy, they're willing to learn and they will travel and they will go to the meetings, they will take notes. And then when they come back, they got so many things they want to do. And I love them to say, hey, you know what? Maybe next year, let's see if we can budget it separately. But I'm going to give you a little bit this year to keep you going. But that's been the biggest change for us from an R&D perspective is go to the younger group, stay away from the old codgers like me, because we don't want to change it, right?
I mean, there's a lot to that. I just had one. I heard another lesson in there is like when you really don't know, raise that hand and go.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true too.
And also, you gave me something to be grateful for this week is, the blessings that I had when I first started. I first started in the consulting space. And so my job was to be shoved into all these rooms and like, go learn, right? And now thinking back on it, especially when I went to the utility space after 12 years of that, that was my flagship. I was like, why are we not pushing these young engineers out the door? They're the ones that are going to bring all the information back. And there was just this like across the board concept of like, well, that's O&M, or like there's always reasons not. It's like, no, that's
exactly.
You stick a young, engaged, and it was me in a room, and you just think you were given a gift. And so that's just such a different perspective to have. Is like put them in there and just let them absorb. They'll find a way, and if not, they'll find that they don't like what you're teaching them, and you'll move on to the next candidate. So
and when you put them in there, they don't have any guardrails, right? They don't have those standards that they wrote. They don't have any personal attachment to it. All they have is an idea of how things work in your utility. They don't always know all the whys or hows it was done. So when they look at this technology, they look at it and say, well, it looks like it'll solve my problem. Let me go figure out how I can do it. Why can't I use this technology? And they start poking holes in your process and your standards to say, no, we can do this. And that's just been so refreshing and enlightening to have that kind of a momentum push in our corporation. It's really been great.
I love that. And I would also, tap into, the community that is developed in a very small industry. So, getting the next round of leaders and energized thinkers out there meeting each other, it's only more beneficial for each individual to meet each other. And then you have the discussion and you're right.
Sure.
Like, I saw so-and-so do that, so that must mean I can do it. I mean, those are the
That's
things
right.
that make us all kind of move forward. So great
Exactly.
advice. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I look forward to maybe checking back in a year or two with you all and see how your projects are moving along.
That'd be fabulous.
Successes. Again, I want to, thank you for jumping on here and sharing your story that you crafted and the story behind, getting all of the stakeholders aligned. I think it's inspiring to me and hopefully inspiring to some of our listeners. So thanks. Jim.
Yeah, tell you, next time we can talk, maybe we'll talk about low growth and data centers. How about that? We got a lot of those in Georgia.
Yeah, let's talk.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.